Here now recognizes the ranking member.
Thank you very much. Dr. Kroll, I want to follow up a little bit on what Chairman Rogers was asking about in terms of the policy behind this. As the Undersecretary for Policy, you seem like the appropriate person to ask that question to. This policy is not without risk. I think we all know that. First of all, it is costing an enormous amount of money in terms of tens of billions of dollars. We are also acutely aware of the fact that we do not want to get into a direct conflict with Russia, and we don't want NATO to get into a direct conflict with Russia. But can you state for us clearly why you still believe this is the correct policy to support Ukraine in this war, what the implications are for our own national security? Because I think it's a legitimate question, the American taxpayer, why are we spending money? It seems like a long way away, and not to be overly crass about it, but a lot of constituents ask the question, what's all this got to do with me? I think the policy is sound, but I want to give you the opportunity to say, here's why this matters to U.S. national security.
Well, thank you. Look, I think the entire international system is grounded on the principle of sovereignty and territorial integrity. It's at the heart of the UN, and that may sound kind of wonky, except that the entire rules-based order that undergirds is what ultimately minimizes the number of international conflicts and wars that we see. If countries like Russia are allowed to go on the march to swallow up their neighbors, if might makes right, if the strong do what they will and the weak suffer what they must, then the rule of law will be replaced with the rule of the jungle. And we will live in a very dangerous world. And I'll just give you one example. If you're sitting in Tehran or in Pyongyang or in Beijing and you're contemplating aggression against a neighbor, and in all those circumstances that's conceivable, you're going to ask yourself, what would be the reaction of the international community? And had the international community stood by, had the United States not exercised its leadership to rally not only the democracies in Europe and North America, but countries around the world to Ukraine's aid, the lesson that dictators in other countries would take is that aggression won't be punished and that it pays. And that would make the world a much more dangerous place for Americans.
I think it's very well stated. And I think one other argument to make in this is a lot of people who are concerned about this point to our policy in Iraq. And certainly there were a ton of mistakes made there. But the thing that a lot of people forget is on your point of sovereignty, what kicked that whole thing out was Saddam Hussein trying to take over Kuwait and then setting his eyes on Saudi Arabia. Now, how we handled that is highly debatable. In terms of the long term, both what we did in '91, what we did in 2003, but the principle of sovereignty and the principle of exactly what you just stated, not allowing a country like Russia or China to think that they can simply grab territory by force, is core to our own security and to the security of the world long term. And as we speak, we are very aware of the Taiwan situation with China. But China, and I haven't added up the number of countries, but it's more than a half dozen, have sovereign territory now that China, to one degree or another, claims. And if just like Russia says that Ukraine shouldn't exist, they should be part of Russia, China has the same argument in land that's currently controlled by Vietnam, by the Philippines, by Japan, by India, all across the world. It kicks off a very, very dangerous situation if President Putin is successful in Ukraine. And I think we need to remember that, even while we are aware of the cost and while we're aware of the necessity of making sure that we check where this money is going, which, as Mr. Storch outlined, I think we're doing. But the policy itself is really crucial to peace and stability in the world and ultimately to our own national security in the United States. None of that makes it easy. We all want peace in Ukraine as quickly as possible. But right now, as has been stated clearly, that the path to peace in Ukraine is simple. Putin can stop his war and take his troops out of sovereign Ukraine. And that stops the war in the blink of an eye. But until that happens, we have to support Ukraine to force Putin to that choice. So I appreciate you articulating that, and I yield back.
Thank the ranking member. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman.